The Chilkey Glacier LW 8KL is not a name that rolls off the tongue, but that might just be the only bad thing I have to say about it, at least on the hardware side of things. Let's talk about it. The Glacier LW 8KL from Chilkey is a mouse that dares to ask, what if we made a mouse that was ultra lightweight, beautiful to look at, with a performance to rival the best in class, all at a price that's closer to the budget bracket than most of its competition. And then we gave it a ridiculous name to throw people off. Okay, look, I'm being a little harsh on the naming convention of this mouse here. After all, it doesn't come close to some of those monitors out there that were named after the path the product designer's cat took across their keyboard. But the praise I have for it, that's honestly pretty well earned. So in this video, I'll be taking a look at the aforementioned convolutedly named mouse while examining it as closely as an American president does teenage beauty pageants in all of the categories you see on the side here. As always, there are timestamps in the description if you want to skip ahead. But first, I do want to point out that Chilkey did send me this mouse free of charge so I could review it, but no money exchanged hands, and I'm in no way obligated to say or not say anything in particular. Cue the obligatory Pinocchio quote. And with that out of the way, it's time to check in with someone who's also very good at cutting strings, Brad Pitt, as we ask ourselves the question voted least likely to get a laugh at a funeral: what's in the box? So, inside this very nice looking box, honestly, we actually start with the mouse itself, which is a fairly uncommon thing, at least in my experience. And this thing is really nice. We'll get to all of that in the next section of the video, but suffice it to say, this thing is deceptively good looking. Then we lift up the plastic inlay and we get to a pouch, in case you want to take this thing somewhere. Next is a little bag with what I first thought was a sticker, but which actually turned out to be a wolf magnet. Not sure what I need that for, but it's also pretty cool, so okay. Then we get to an actual sticker, and next a set of extra skates, which is really considerate actually. Followed by a pack of grip tape for the mouse in case you prefer a less slippery grip. Then we get to the manual, which earned this level of totally legit enthusiasm from my daughter. Next is an extra little box which contains a very nice braided USB-A to USB-C cable. I'm a big fan of companies that give you a braided cable. And finally, there's another little box, this one containing the receiver for hooking this thing up to your computer. And that is a lot of stuff right there. Maybe I'm easily impressed. I mean, I did just rewatch like 100 hours of Marvel Netflix shows just so I could see Mahershala Ali for a few episodes.
You like my Biggie photo?
But I honestly think this was a pretty solid unboxing experience overall, with more than what you need to get started, as well as some extras that are really nice to see. Alright, let's talk about the design of this thing. The Glacier, I'm just going to call it the Glacier from now on, might seem like a pretty subtle and simple looking device at first glance, which is why I refer to it as deceptively good looking. There are no RGB lights on it, no crazy sharp edges, splashy logos, or even any fancy colors. It's just a sleek, all-black mouse with soft curves and simple lines along the buttons, a splash of gold on the scroll wheel, and a tiny logo along the front of the left side. But upon closer inspection, you'll find extra little touches that add to the feeling of this being something that's more premium than it initially lets on. Stuff like the little detailed ridges on the scroll wheel, the same gold accent being echoed on the lettering on the underside of the mouse, or how that same underside is just the slightest bit translucent with a subtle pattern showing itself once you look at it in the right light. And then there's that screen. That's right, the Glacier mouse actually has a little LCD display on the bottom part of the right mouse button, which it uses to display information such as your current DPI and polling rate, how much battery it has left, and your mode of connection. Now, it only shows you this information when the mouse is in standby, but as soon as you use it, the display turns itself off. I guess it wouldn't make much sense showing that information to the underside of your middle finger. That being said, even when the display is off, it does add a bit of character and helps the mouse stand out without being too distracting. So, all in all, I think there's a ton of stuff to like about the design here. But is it perfect? No. On a personal note, I would have really liked for the rest of the accent parts of the mouse to follow the same gold scheme as the scroll wheel, especially the skates on the underside, which end up looking a bit cheap and plasticky, which is a shame given how elegant the rest of this thing looks. The material it's made out of does feel pretty nice, we'll get to that in a minute, and the soft matte coating does add to the overall feeling of luxury this thing exudes at times. But it does come at the cost of being very susceptible to stains from sweaty fingers. Meaning, if you have even the slightest bit of moisture coming from your hands when gaming, and let's be real, you're watching this video, which means you're at least as nerdy as I am, so palms are sweaty, mom's spaghetti, and so on. Yeah, this thing is gonna look, let's just say, well used after just a few hours, which does detract from the overall aesthetic of it as well. However, I do still think it's an absolutely excellent looking device, but it does get held back slightly by some of the design choices, which is a shame because with just a few minor tweaks here and there, I genuinely feel like this could be one of the best looking mice I've ever seen. Sorry, Mickey.
Oh, I'll beat your ass, bitch boy!
Before we move on, let's just do a quick test of how this thing sounds. Okay, next up is comfort. And as always, when we talk about a gaming mouse, we have to concede the fact that this thing is not going to be able to compete with more ergonomically tailored mice in this category. But that doesn't mean it's bad though. I'd say the Glacier does hold up pretty well in spite of its simple shape, and it's helped along by a few different good things it has going for it. First up is the weight, or rather the lack of it. The Glacier weighs in at only 47 grams or 1.65 ounces, which is just preposterously light. Then there's the material it's made of. While the Glacier is clearly a plastic mouse, because what the hell else would it be? It does have a soft coating to it, which is very comfortable to hold and also just feels premium. Now, it is a rather short mouse, at least vertically, which is not something I personally mind, and it does mean you can also use it in a claw grip more easily, for example, but it does lead to just a bit of fatigue over time. This is mitigated somewhat by it being about as light as Conor McGregor's interest in staying sober, as well as all the soft curves to it, but just keep in mind that this is still a gaming mouse. That being said, Chilkey has also gone a step beyond in some key areas, such as making the left mouse button 3 grams lighter than the right one to reduce fatigue when using it. Although, why they couldn't just make both the buttons lighter, I don't know. Alright, let's talk about the features next. First off, the Glacier has a left click, a right click, a scroll wheel which can also be clicked, 2 buttons on the left side of the mouse, and then on the underside, it has a DPI toggle and a slider to switch between connectivity modes. Pretty standard stuff, really. Of course, there's also the little display, which I mentioned earlier in the video, but the big question is really, how useful is it actually? Well, to be honest, I've kind of flip-flopped on this thing a couple of times already. My initial reaction was, hey, that's cool, seems pretty useful too. But after a few days, I realized I hadn't actually used it at all, so I thought, oh well, guess it's more of a gimmick really. But then, after struggling to set the DPI to a setting I liked, it dawned on me that I could just look at the display to see what it was currently at and where I liked it the most without having to guess. And the same thing goes for the battery life as well as the polling rate. So, at this point in time, I do think it's useful, even if only slightly. It's definitely a feature you won't really see anywhere else, and I have found myself genuinely using it to quickly gather some information that otherwise would have taken me a lot longer to find. The only thing I don't like about it now is how there isn't like a tap to wake function, which would have made it even better. Instead, I have to resort to lifting it up and just sort of waiting for a second or two, which sometimes works. I don't know, maybe I'm doing it wrong. Of course, we can't talk features without talking about the software side of things. And I'm afraid I have bad news here. You see, Chilkey does have an online driver software in which you're able to reconfigure the buttons, set certain macro functions, and so on, but I am completely unable to use it. Whenever I try, the software just does not recognize my mouse no matter what I do. Now, it's important to note here that Chilkey did send me this as a pre-release unit, so you might have more luck with the software side of things once it's officially released. But for the time being, I'm left with the standard configuration for this mouse and not a whole lot I can do about it. Overall, in terms of features, it's hard to really judge it without seeing the software side of things, but from what I have seen, it's pretty good, although not perfect. The fact that the scroll wheel doesn't support infinite scrolling, as well as the slightly janky nature of the display, does ultimately detract from the overall experience, but otherwise it's very solid here. Okay, it's time to look at the responsiveness of this mouse. And of course, this is where a dedicated gaming mouse should excel over others, and the Glacier is definitely no slouch in this department. It has a PixArt PAW 3950 sensor, which is a great sensor overall, and it supports a DPI of up to 30,000, which is an extremely high number. In fact, I think setting your DPI, which basically equates to sensitivity, any higher than even 6400 is just completely unnecessary. I mean, just look at how fast this thing is moving across the screen right now, and that's only at 3200. So imagine going almost 10 times as high as that. But it can do it. It also has an IPS of 750, meaning it can track your movements at a speed of up to 750 inches per second, which equates to 42 miles per hour or 68 kilometers per hour, which is faster than my car goes after a weekend of me binge eating. The Glacier also uses something that Chilkey refers to as a fog blue optical switch, which differs from a mechanical switch by giving you zero delay actuation, as well as eliminating the possibility of errors such as accidental double clicks. And all of this is propped up by the final cherry on top, which is a polling rate of up to 8,000 Hz, meaning it has a response time of just over 0.1 milliseconds, which is ridiculously fast. Look, I could throw numbers like this at you all day long, but the TLDR version is this. The Glacier can rival pretty much any high-end gaming mouse you can buy in every category you can think of. It really is that good when it comes to responsiveness. Alright, so how about the connectivity of this mouse? Well, it has the same tri-mode connectivity that we see in most mice these days, meaning you can use it via Bluetooth, via a dongle for a 2.4 GHz connection, or by using the included USB-A to USB-C cable for a wired connection through the port in the front. That's right, Apple, you actually can make a mouse which can be used while it's plugged in. Now, personally, I haven't had any connectivity issues while using this mouse for the past week or so, outside of the fact that it does seem to take a second or two of jostling the mouse around to wake it up from its sleep mode. As far as the battery life, however, well, I'm not quite as sold on that front, to be honest. Chilkey themselves sent me a document touting the excellent battery life as one of the Glacier's main features, but I don't think 20 hours of battery life qualifies as excellent on anything other than a high-end laptop or a tablet. Of course, that is only in the 8K wireless mode. If you turn down the polling rate to 1000 Hz, which you might as well because you won't be able to tell the difference between that and 8K anyways, you'll get up to 60 hours of battery life, which is decent, though not great. And finally, using it via Bluetooth will get you up to 100 hours of use, but of course that does drop the polling rate down to a measly 125 Hz. All in all, the battery life does leave something to be desired here, but at the same time, if we're being realistic, I don't see how you would go 60 hours without being able to charge this thing. especially given the fact that the included dongle requires using a USB-C cable in order to function, so if you're using that, then you have a cable right there to charge it with anyway. But it's still worth pointing out that while the Glacier does offer a solid, blazing fast connection, its battery life is decidedly less than stellar. And finally, let's talk about versatility. Basically, how good is this mouse at doing several different things? The main categories being gaming and productivity. Well, theoretically, it should be pretty good as a productivity mouse, with you being able to reprogram the buttons in the Chilkey software hub. However, since I can't get the damn thing to actually work, I'm afraid I'm not able to evaluate just how good it is or isn't in this regard. Some drivers allow you to set different configurations you can quickly switch between with the press of a button, and some even allow you to automatically switch between different pre-made setups based on which program you're currently in. Does the Chilkey software hub do this? Well, in the words of the immortal bard Ryan George, I don't know. Look, I'm generally a fan of using gaming mice for other tasks than gaming, simply because they're so light and responsive, and given the extra set of buttons on the side, something like the Glacier could easily be a great device to use for stuff like writing or video editing, 3D modeling, and so many other things. But in this case, you're just gonna have to take Chilkey's word for it. Look, the Glacier isn't quite as flawless as I had first hoped it would be. However, it is still a pretty damn good mouse overall. On the pro side of things, it's super lightweight, its specs can rival pretty much anything out there on the market, the build quality is great both in terms of feel and design, and the little display on it is pretty cool and actually useful. However, as far as cons, it does have a pretty limited battery life. There's no support for infinite scrolling, which is a bit of a deterrent as far as using it for other stuff than just gaming, and it does collect stains like a teenage boy's bedsheets. Also, the software support is less than stellar, although that last point might just be a pre-release issue. All in all, in spite of those minor complaints, I do feel like there's just so much to love about the Glacier. It is pound for pound an absolute beast and might just be the best outright gaming mouse I've ever tried. So, in my opinion, if you're looking for something to rival the very best out there while adding a couple of unique features of its own, then the Chilkey Glacier LW 8KL is definitely worth it. That's it for this video. Do give it a like if you made it this far, as it really does support the channel, and subscribe if you want to see more tech and gadget reviews. And I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace out.